In July of 2014, 5 graduate students and 1 undergrad visited South Africa with Dr. Roseborough. Our mission was to learn as much about the South African education system as possible and their struggles to go from apartheid to a free democratic society. So, what happens? How does one get to South Africa? First of all, getting there is not half the fun as some vacations or trips are be. It might be okay if it wasn't for the fact that South Africa is a long ways away. So, when we traveled from South Africa, we actually went from Raleigh-Durham International Airport to JFK Airport to Johannesburg Airport, and eventually our last destination for the first leg of our trip was Port Elizabeth. So the main flight from JFK to Johannesburg is 8,260 miles one way. The pros of the trip was the food was actually very good on the airport or in the airplane. Service was great in the airplane, and of course, my attempt at humor, it beats walking to South Africa. The cons are the flight is approximately 15 hours just for that leg. 6 hour time difference certainly makes jet lag an issue, and you have the usual airport drama. Now, 15 hours in economy is quite painful, so I recommend getting a good mindset, bringing some movies, some reading material, and doing your best trying to sleep when you can on the trip to let the time pass. Now, once we got into South Africa, and we got on our plane and got to Port Elizabeth, we were able to start really our trip when we got to Port Elizabeth. Port Elizabeth is a town that was founded in 1820 by English settlers. The population of the city proper is a little over 300,000 people. But the metro population is very large. The metro population is over 1.1 million people, and Port Elizabeth is located in the Eastern Cape region. So let's talk a little bit about Port Elizabeth City proper. Port Elizabeth is a vibrant city. It is fairly large, obviously with 300,000. It has lots of commerce, and it has a big element of resort and vacation spots, such as a great waterfront with lots of amenities and those type of things. So when one travels through and around Port Elizabeth, it looks like a big tourist town, but obviously also a center for shipping and receiving of goods, those type of things. But let's talk about the metro area. As we saw, the population, including the metro area, was a little over 1.1 million. And what that is actually the townships. Now, some might ask, what is a township? Basically, in South Africa, when we refer to townships, it's a term that refers to an urban living area that was reserved for non-whites during apartheid. Townships were usually built on the periphery of towns. So basically, through the policy of apartheid, non-whites were forced out of the cities and basically forced to live in these townships. Now, there are some differences when you go to the townships. There are some things to take a look at. The first thing is that there are certainly formal township settlements. These would be like any type of bedroom community in the U.S., whereby the houses are mostly middle class or could even be better. They also are basically like any type of bedroom community. But a large portion of the townships are also what you would call informal township settlements. And these settlements are basically made up of structures that are homemade. It might be from some tin, some wood, some fencing, anything that they can get their hands on to put together some form of shelter to live at. It may or may not have electricity. If it has electricity, often that electricity is actually stolen by very dangerous means of providing electricity, drop cords from house to house, stealing things off the poles, those type of things. So if it does have electricity, it may or may not be safe. Water is certainly something that is not easy to come by. Through the Reconstruction and Development Program, more clean water is and has been added to the townships around the country, to the tune of typically now a water spigot of clean water is within about 600 feet of residents, but still running water in these informal townships is something that does not exist. Now, I mentioned the Reconstruction and Development Program. After Nelson Mandela was elected in 1994, a program called RDP actually took place, and it was designed to actually provide a lot of resources to these township areas where over the many, many, many years of oppression that there could be some relief. So one of the things that you can see is that the township itself, this is an example that you're seeing of a reconstruction development program where the informal settlement was basically torn down and inexpensive government housing was built in its place where there was power, there was water, clean water. And what you're seeing here in this brief video is an example of where an informal township once existed, but through the Reconstruction Development Program, it was made much, much better. But let's talk a little bit of RDP before we go on. With the Reconstruction Development Program from 1994 to 2001, the government actually built 1.1 million homes and they were constructed. So a lot of homes were created for the folks to live in, for the folks in the township to live in. There has some criticism about, hey, it's not enough. It's not enough homes, but overall, 1.1 certainly is an accomplishment. One question that folks might ask is, who gets these homes? Does people have to qualify? And the answer is yes. We were actually told by one of our drivers that there is a basically qualifications where the folks that get these homes built do have to have jobs, do have to basically be employed and meet some income level specifications to get that assistance. The RDP also allowed for clean water. By 2000, 4.9 million people that did not have access to clean water now have access within 600 feet of their dwelling. And electricity was another thing. By 2000, 1.7 million homes were connected through the national grid. And one thing to note is that a lot of these homes also were in rural areas, so a lot of rural areas. And another big one through RDP was certainly land reform. Basically, by 2000, 250,000 people were given land. That doesn't mean that they didn't earn it or it wasn't something they were living on, but they might have been living and farming on some land that no one really owned, and through land reform, they were able to give 250,000 people by 2000, and certainly that number must have changed, but by 2000, 250,000 people had land rights and land ownership, whereas before they were prevented from having land rights and ownership under apartheid. Healthcare also improved. By 2000, 500 new health clinics were built, giving nearly 5 million people access to healthcare that they didn't have before. So when you get to South Africa, the one thing you'll notice is that they drive on the right side of the road. On the left side of the road, excuse me. So when they drive on the left side of the road, it's a little bit different. Obviously, none of us were confident in driving on the left side of the road, so we got around with a hired driver. But one thing you'll notice is that in South Africa, there are a lot of these minibuses. These minibuses take a lot of folks a town. They're kind of taxis, minibuses. Most of them do operate on pseudo routes, but you can pay a little bit of money. You can fit 15 people in there, and you can get from one place to another. So a lot of folks do take these little mini taxis around. This is a couple of photos of our inside of our van with our driver, and just for fun, you can see the car over there that where no one's driving, but yes, of course they are, because they're driving on the left side and they're sitting on the right side of the car. Well, one thing to notice when you get to South Africa is a question of safety. One of the things that hit me that I first noticed when we took a trip from the airport in Port Elizabeth to our lodgings is all of the security and safety that you could see. Unfortunately, South Africa has one of the highest violent crime rates among the industrialized nations. Out of 218 countries, South Africa has the 11th highest murder rate. And one thing also to note is that because law enforcement may not be as effective or may not have as much resources, contracted services basically augment policing services. And what I mean by that is that a lot of security companies, when you have an alarm for your home, you're not just hiring someone to monitor your alarm and call the police. No, they don't really call the police for you. They actually will show up with an armed response team to protect you. You can see that from this photo, there is an electric fence. This is extremely common. It's very common to have very large walls around homes, structures, and businesses and buildings that may be 8 foot tall, and then on top of that, they have electrified fences. Here are some examples of some of the signs that you can see on people's homes. They talk about, hey, we have ADT with an armed response, Atlas armed response, and just for grins, I might show you here is a plant that someone did not want stolen, so they put spikes on the plant as far as that kind of stuff goes. I would like to say that throughout my time spent in Port Elizabeth, I did not feel unsafe. Now, it is a little unnerving to see all these safety precautions and these security precautions, but a little piece of me can't help but think that it's some cultural leftovers from the years of apartheid and the civil unrest during those years. When I talked to the folks, including the principal that we spent a lot of time with, they did say these security measures were necessary and that if you didn't have it, you would probably be robbed. But at no time, I want to stress, did I feel unsafe being in Port Elizabeth. Now, some folks said, hey, where did you stay? Well, the good thing is we stayed at some nice accommodations. The place we stayed at Port Elizabeth was a guest house called Hobby Beach, and they basically was a great place to stay, and they offered a great breakfast every day, which was a wonderful English breakfast and those type of things. So we stayed in nice surroundings, and the hotel rooms were great, and basically accommodations in South Africa were very reasonably priced based on the prices that I saw. It was not uncommon for a guest house like this to be in the neighborhood of $50 to $60 per person a night. So the accommodations were nice and the amenities were good. But let's talk about the schools in South Africa. First of all, in South Africa, the schools, as far as I've put on here this slide, K-12, but they really don't have kindergarten. Their grade kindergarten would be R, and grade R is not common. Most schools actually start out at first grade. When you hear the term primary school, the compulsory age of education is 7 years old. So learners start school when they're 7. But let's talk about some highlights of the educational system. When we look at some highlights of the educational system, the school configuration is one of them. Typically, like I said, the primary school is typically grades 1 through 7, and then the secondary school or the high school would be grades 8, 12, and that's very common during that. One thing to note is that during apartheid, there were 3 government agencies at that time and separate schools for different races. The Department of Education and Training actually took care of all the black South African schools. The House of Representatives took care of the colored schools, and the Model C schools, which were the whites-only schools, had its own separate entity. And they were all basically had different funding streams, different amounts of funding, and during apartheid times, the Model C or the white-only schools would typically receive nearly 90% of the funding the government provided for education. Now all these schools are governed under one organization, which is the Department of Basic Instruction. One of the things that I really like about the school system is just a little bit semantics, just a little bit of words, but the use of the word learners. All their students that we call students in the U.S., they call learners. So all their literature, they talk about the learners do X, Y, Z, the learners here, the learners there, and that was a great way that I liked for them to refer to their learners, simply because it shows what they're doing, the act that they're doing, they're learning. And I really did like that, and that's something that I'm going to try to incorporate a little more in my vocabulary. Now, the school that we stayed the most at was Imafini Primary School. This is a wonderful school. It's located in a Port Elizabeth Township. The grades are 1 through 7, and there are approximately a little over 1,230 learners. They have 37 teachers, and the doors opened in 1989. And their vision is to provide a quality education to learners in order to uplift and empower them to play a responsible and meaningful role in society. Their mission, as you can see, was encouraging parental and community involvement in our school, which we did see tons of that. It was amazing. The ladies that actually cook the lunch for the students every day were volunteer parents, unpaid volunteer parents. There was a unpaid volunteer parent that worked the front desk at the school as well. Other mission objectives is to raise standards for learners at all levels, both in and out of school, provide quality education by the means of instructions, guidance, and facilitation by a core of qualified, dedicated, and accountable educators, to use cutting-edge technology and methods in educating and developing learners, which their technology is something that is, they do have a computer lab. They have about 8 computers in a computer lab. They do have internet access, but it is something that certainly just the lack of resources and funding. But as far as other schools, it's my understanding that they are using some pretty cutting-edge technology with those computers, and to make our learners productive and patriotic citizens of our country. Now, Imafini was, like I said, was the school that we spent the most time at, and it was wonderful. The educators there are caring, warm. They want the best for their students. The students were caring and warm and well behaved. That was one of the biggest things that we noticed from our American schools compared to the South African schools, is the students' behavior. There was a assembly one morning where there were 1,200 students out there, and the behavior was exceptional. They were very, very quiet. They followed all instructions, and it was amazing. Now, if you look at these pictures here, one of the things is that's the main school building. The picture at the top right is actually the library. They actually have a library in it was a very unique situation. A lot of buildings and neat structures are created through recycling shipping containers. Port Elizabeth is a big shipping and receiving for large cargo ships, so there's a lot of container use. And their library was very good, and it was housed in one of those shipping containers, as far as that goes. Like I said, the students were very well behaved and very studious and very interested in their learning and education. One thing that's a little bit ironic is we talked a little bit about security. There is a fence all around the school, and as you can see, there's also barbed wire. So the sign for the school is a little bit obstructed by that, but it kind of foreshadows some of the security concerns. When we had gotten there, just the day before, they had some equipment stolen out of a new kitchen that they were trying to build. So theft and security is something that they do have to truly worry about. But here are some more photos of the school and of the learners, and all working really hard and really diligent. One thing to note here is that you can see in the photo on the left, in the background, there's a small blue building. That blue building is a refurbished shipping container that is going to be a second kitchen. They feed 1,200 students a day out of a very small kitchen. The top right photo is a picture of that kitchen, and that kitchen is approximately 8 foot by 10 foot. So with the new kitchen, it'll be a wonderful addition, and it should make it a lot easier. Now the bottom right photo is actually a picture of their first grade. As the school grew and the students grew in numbers, they needed more areas, more instructional areas. So those are actually shipping containers, recycled shipping containers that are housing the first grade students. So let's look at Imafini by the numbers. First of all, Imafini is a no-fee school. This is certainly important to note. It is a no-fee school, and what that really means is that there is no fee for the students to attend. In the States, we kind of expect that the public schools are no fee, although we do have fees. We have this fee, that fee, but in general, it is a free public education. In South Africa, there are schools that are public schools that are allowed and require parents to pay tuition, to pay fees to go to school. Imafini is a no-fee school. It is actually also classified as a third quintile school. There are 5 quintiles. Number one, first quintile, is the poorest. So what that means is it takes a look at the school very similar to our free and reduced lunch, although that's not what they go the numbers by, but it looks at the parents, the community needs, those type of things, and determine what community might be with the most needs. So Imafini is considered a third quintile, and there are 5 quintiles, with the first quintile being the poorest. So with some of the things that we saw at Imafini, we saw certainly some great poverty there. There are actually schools that have communities that are in more dire straits. And during our visit to South Africa, the poorest school that we did see would be classified as a third quintile school, just like Imafini. So let's take a look at the money. Imafini receives approximately $130,000 a year to fund the school. When you calculate it out, it's around $108 per student per year. That does not include the salaries for the professional staff. Like North Carolina, the state actually provides position allotments for those staff. So that dollars amount does not have to go towards professional staff. But let's put it in perspective. The average school district in North Carolina receives approximately $2,500 per student, and that also does not include the salaries for the professional staff or the teachers. So right out of the bat, you're looking at North Carolina receives nearly 25 times the amount of money per student to operate than the schools in South Africa, like Imafini. They qualify for 40 positions. Of that 40 positions, it's 1 principal, 1 deputy principal, 5 heads of department, and 33 standard teachers, which is kind of interesting. One thing to note, the school of Imafini being very large, having over 1,200 learners, their principal doesn't have to teach. But wait a second, what did I just say? Well, if you have less than 500 students, principals are required to actually teach classes as well as be the principal of the school. One thing to note for their child nutrition program, they receive $59,300 a year to feed 1,200 plus children. And they do this 201 school days a year. So this roughly totals to 23 cents per child per school day to feed through the child nutrition program. And that 23 cents does go a long way. They do a great job with their purchasing of ingredients, and since the staff of their lunch facility are all volunteer parents, that 23 cents does not have to include labor. But it is amazing that they're able to feed those children for 23 cents a day. So let's take a look at another school that we visited, Lungisa High School. Lungisa High School is also located in Port Elizabeth Township. It's grade 8 through 12. They have 958 learners, 33 teachers, and Imafini is one of the feeder school to that. Now, Lungisa is actually very close to Imafini. If from the air, or actually from Imafini, you can look over, across, and down the hill, you can actually see the high school. The high school is constructed in the 90s, which is amazing because a lot of the architecture of our non-white schools looks like it would be maybe 60s construction, but in reality, a lot of them were built in the 90s. That just the workmanship and materials were just not up to the kind of code and level that we're used to here in the States. In the bottom right photo, you can see these students. This was actually, we visited the high school on a day that they were getting out early because the teachers were going to some teacher training, so I'd say a half-day release. But the students were actually helping taking care of the buildings. The students in the bottom right-hand corner were actually buffing the floor. It was kind of fun because they had these buffing pads and they were using them as skates, and they were cleaning the floors of one of their classrooms. Here are some more pictures of Lungisa. As you can tell, the repair of the facilities is very difficult to keep their facilities going well with the amount of money they receive. One thing I didn't mention is for Emma Feeney, with their school buildings and with their budget, they actually receive approximately $10,000 a year for the maintenance of their facility. Last year, Emma Feeney needed most of that to help with their security and repair of a fence. So based upon if the high school here gets the same funding formula, since they have less students, I would guess that maybe they might receive $8,000 a year roughly to take care of their facilities. And as you can see, $8,000 would be very difficult to take care of a large high school when it comes to those needs. Now, Lungisa has a vision. Their vision is that our school is to produce holistically developed, skilled, independent, and disciplined learners, thereby making our institution a center of effective and meaningful teaching and learning, thus a Model E excellent. I find it interesting their school creed is, "We will do our best." They do have a mission. As you can see, they have several goals. They're going to create a safe and secure, user-friendly environment for educators, learners, and our stakeholders. Security is, as you can see, and safety is one of the top concerns of a lot of these schools. And when we were at Lungisa, they are actually working on some security because they had a building out back that had been broken into several times, and they were working on some of those type of things. Other goals is to uphold professional integrity, honesty, and sense of responsibility for our shared values, use a learner-centered approach within an outcome-based learning paradigm, provide extracurricular program which supports the development of the whole person, provide curriculum which meets the career employment needs of the learners and corporate world, and provide for a democratic and participative leadership, and embark on a continual development of personnel, which I find their last goal of their mission was actually very good. And when we were there, it was echoed because the teachers were going to some professional development, and they certainly were working on that. Lungisa High School, by some of the numbers, it is also a no-fee school that is in the third quintile as far as need. One thing to note is 59.5% of the students passed their senior certificate exam. Basically, when you pass your senior certificate exam, that basically says, hey, did you pass high school? Did you actually get were you considered a qualified senior and passing high school? Just to comparison, basically 55% of the schools in the district perform greater than Lungisa. So Lungisa is kind of in the middle, right there in the middle of schools when it comes to performance. They had some good goals for this year, and the principal and leadership there were talking about meeting some greater expectations. In 2013, 16.67% of the students at Lungisa qualified to attend college. The regional average was 29.20%. The administration said that they certainly wanted to increase that goal so they would have more students eligible to attend colleges. Next, I'd like to talk about ex-Model C schools. I've entitled this section How the Other Half Lives. Really, it's only 8.9%, and that reflects the number of white students in South Africa. Former Model C schools are schools that were designed for white students only. They received a lot of benefits during apartheid. Some argue that they may have received up to 90% of the education funding went to Model C schools. These are typically these are public schools, but they typically do have fees attached, so there is tuition. So let's take a look at that. First of all, I want to make sure and be clear that folks don't think that I am bashing or talking poorly of these Model C schools because they have had the resources in the past. Far from the contrary, these are good schools, but they also have their own struggles and problems that they have now that apartheid is gone. But let's take a look. First of all, let's take a look at Gray Junior School. Gray Junior School is an all-boys school. It is a former Model C school, which was a whites-only school. Now it's integrated, and we have students from many different races now involved in there. Cursory, at least from anecdotally looking at the school, I would say that about 10% of the school's population is now students of color or non-white students. In order to go to Gray Junior School, junior primary school, you are required to pay a fee. You are required to pay tuition. That tuition is approximately $17.50 per year charged to the parents. In some cases, that fee will be waived if the student is unable to pay the charges due to their financial situation. English is the language of instruction, and they certainly rely on fundraising for many things. One of my favorite quotes out of the trip actually came from the headmaster. When he was referring to U.S. schools, he said, "Oh yes, U.S. schools." He had visited some schools in California. He says, "The schools in the U.S. are horribly overregulated," which I thought was fun and quite a good observation from many perspectives. Let's take a look though, and just to talk a little bit about that $1,750 fee. If you recall, in a previous slide, I talked about Emma Feeney being a non-fee school, and that's correct. Students do not have to pay a fee to attend. Well, Gray is the public school that has this fee, but to put it in perspective, they also get the government funds. Now, they are certainly not a needy school financially, therefore they do receive less funding from the government than Emma Feeney, but that less funding is still, they receive about $97 per student. So when you add and round up a little bit, they're basically working off a premise that they're receiving $1,850 per student. One of the things that's different at Gray is at Gray, they have a very large faculty and staff. They're actually using that tuition, that money that they're receiving, to add more faculty and staff. So when you really think about it, them receiving $1,850 is a far cry from being a very rich school. Their parents have to do a lot of fundraising in order to keep other things going. If you recall, Emma Feeney received approximately $10,000 in maintenance of their facilities. Well, Gray would actually receive a little bit less than that for the government. So not only does the tuition would have to be incorporated in some maintenance, having facilities like this, there's no possible way that you could work on a budget of $8,000 a year to maintain them. Therefore, their parents do have to do fundraising in order to help with the maintenance and facilities such as their fields, their roofs. The headmaster actually said that the previous year, the parents had raised approximately 2 million rand, which is about $200,000, in order to pay for a roof on one of the sections of there. It is beautiful facilities, as you can see. What a contrast between Emma Feeney and Gray, but that was truly the stark reality of apartheid. But very good, very neat school to visit. Have a lot of good instruction, a lot of good things going on there as well. We visited some classrooms and talked to some teachers and visited some art rooms. But certainly you can tell that during the apartheid eras, a lot of money flew into this school. And now there's still a lot of money that has to be going through the school, but it's one of those things where it takes a lot of effort from the parents to raise the money to keep the school into condition and to keep the things going, to keep that going. I think I may have mentioned this, but if you look at it in the North Carolina, the average school district in North Carolina, not counting the money spent on faculty and staff, spends about or receives about $2,500 per student per year. So they truly, even in North Carolina, our average public school will receive more money than Gray does per pupil to keep things going. But certainly a beautiful school. Another ex-Model C school that we visited was one called Cape Recife. And it was a very unique high school. Unfortunately, I do not have as many pictures of this school as I would like to have. What was very neat about this high school is that it was actually designed for exceptional children. Exceptional children was its focus. it was called a high school, but it served grades R through 12, R being their form of kindergarten. And while we were there, we did see students that fit this age bracket in instruction. They even have a dormitory on campus for some students. Um, they offer instruction in two home languages, Afrikaans and English. And they offered many, many specialized services. If there was a therapy that you needed, the chances are that your student needed, chances are there would be a professional on staff that could do that. They had physical therapy, speech therapy. Basically, they had a very good selection of services. Now, this was a ex-Model C school, now integrated with many races. And while we were there, anecdotally, I would say it was probably more. It was probably more in the terms of half and half, as far as between whites and non-whites during just a brief visit of the school. Now, it is a fee school. There is tuition. They did not really discuss to us how much parents had to pay for their children to go to the school, but they did talk about that there were some scholarships in ways that folks that could not afford to pay for, being able to, that they would be able to attend the school. So it was a very unique experience in a very different way to handle exceptional children, as far as the education with a school that was specified for them. Now we're going to go back to a township school. And I'm going to talk about it briefly. We did have an opportunity to visit a school called Alfonso Airy Primary School. And this primary school was certainly an eye-opener as far as some of the different conditions that some of the schools face. The first thing to talk about is really the name of the school. Alfonso Aries was actually a child that was shot and killed by police during a demonstration in the community where the school is built. What had happened was that there was not a school close by in the township area that the school was, and there was a protest to basically say, hey, let's build some schools for us. And the protest did get out of hand, and unfortunately there was the casualty, and this child unfortunately was shot. So the school was eventually built, and it was named after this child who was killed during that demonstration. One of the things that you see here, and this is why we visited the school, was their new library. Their library is located in a shipping container. It was donated by the Volkswagen Corporation. Volkswagen provides a lot of funding for community outreach programs in South Africa because there's a Volkswagen plant in Port Elizabeth that builds the cars for European markets and South African markets. This was a very unique library, giving these students a opportunity to check out books. Here's a few pictures. The first one is the picture of the principal. The principal actually at Alfonso Aries has a big job because the class sizes of that school are enormous. Class sizes that it's not uncommon in a classroom to have 100 to 120 children in one classroom. If you look at the bottom right, you can see a classroom. These classrooms are not large, and to fit 120 children in there, they use carpet squares and other things to basically keep things going. So very interesting conditions as far as the class size these teachers are faced with. If you look in the upper right photo, you can see the area that the school is located in, and those houses are the houses as far as the RDP houses that the government had built. So basically, all across the hillside and around the school was this township community that the school did serve. In this photo, you can see an inside picture of the library that Volkswagen had donated. You also see another classroom. Once again, fitting 100 to 120 children in one of these classrooms is certainly a logistical feat. And the bottom right photo is just more of the buildings. The school is built, and they say that it's a mobile temporary school, mobile structure, which is very interesting because these buildings are of high quality. And the courtyard's brick. So while they're mobile temporary, it's one of those things that I would suspect that because of education funding, it's probably more of a permanent situation for Alfonso Aries. But this was a very interesting, eye-opening school to see. One thing also to note is that it was a quintile 3 school, which meant that it fell in the same category as Lungisa and the same category as Imafini when it came to the community makeup and how poor the community is and the extra support that the schools might have. So even though they have 100 to 120 students in some of these classrooms, the level of support that they receive is very similar to others, and there are actually schools that are worse than them as far as the need. Now we're going to skip a little bit to community outreach. I mentioned that Volkswagen had donated that container to in the library for that school. Volkswagen also helps with other community outreach, and they were able to take us and look at the Love Life Center, which is absolutely wonderful. In Africa, South Africa has the highest rate of HIV infections in the world. From history, you may know that really HIV kind of started out of Africa. That's where the first cases out of South Africa. That's where the first cases were. So there are several generations that have been effective with horrible negativity with HIV and AIDS. Love Life Center is a community outreach center in one of the townships that was designed to educate and improve lives and educate folks about HIV. Among other activities, certainly educating folks about HIV and working to combat that issue was one of their main focuses. What's very interesting about Love Life is the fact that it's the positive attitudes and the programs were very contagious. Everyone that worked at the center knew the mission, spoke the mission, and you could tell was very involved in making their community a better place. It was a very unique place. Not only do they offer education about HIV, they offer it as a youth center so that youth can come and play games, learn some new activities, all sorts of things. So it wasn't just an education center. They ran a radio station, a full-time radio station for the community to give them news and information. What you can see on the left there is the DJ, the person that manages the radio station. They have a full-time nurse to help with counseling, help with HIV testing, those type of things, as you can see in the upper right hand. And they had a big community center where they could have people come in and give speeches and talks about all sorts of things. The day that we were there, there were some folks that were coming in to talk about their entrepreneurship and how they were designing jewelry. You can see that in the upper right-hand corner. In another room, there was actually a group of folks that were teaching children after school that were giving them tutorials on reading, and they were reading to them. And some of these children were school age, some were almost school age, but they were working on reading early as far as that goes. So the community outreach that Volkswagen had provided by building the facility for Love Life was very impressive, and I would recommend anyone to go on the web and read more about the program and the good work that they're doing. Now we're switching gears. We're going to take a look at South Africa's university system. This photo is actually a photo of the one of the main buildings at the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. One of our main items when we went to explore the universities is we wanted to know how did the universities work with the school systems, the R12 school systems, and how did they prepare teachers and administrators. The first thing we learned was how they prepare teachers now is a lot different on how teachers were prepared before apartheid. During apartheid, teachers that might have taught at a Model C school or an all-white school did attend the university. Teachers that taught at a colored school or a black school, chances are they did not attend the traditional university, but instead attended a teaching college. These teaching colleges were designed to help prepare teachers for the world of the classroom. After the end of apartheid, there were many scholars and there were many folks in the university systems that certainly wanted to take a look at the teacher preparedness, and they determined that some of these colleges may not have been up to the quality standards. So most of the colleges were closed and or merged with the university systems, and now the universities are responsible for preparing teachers for all schools. We did talk to some of the teachers and administrators that graduated from these schools, and you could tell there was a disappointment of some of the school closures. There was also a argument that seemed very valid that there was a teacher shortage, especially in the grades 1 through 3, that these teacher colleges were very good at filling the niche for. And unfortunately, they were having a shortage in grades 1 through 3, and they felt that if some of these colleges could be opened up, that it might be able to bring better opportunities for them. When we asked about how do you prepare your administrators, we found that to be a very interesting part where it was very lacking in South Africa. Many of the principals become principals just out of time factor, out of seniority, out of basically the unions help appoint the principal that they might, and that there are very little training programs to make administrators, unlike in the United States where there are full degrees that you go to take just to become administrators. So there are some training through professional organizations for administrators, but most of these administrators have on-the-job type training. University life after apartheid is certainly a interesting phenomenon. During apartheid, most universities were designated for whites only. So after 1994, when the universities went through a change, they have had to work very hard to be inclusive. When we were in Cape Town, the University of Cape Town, we learned of a program that they had called CHED. And CHED is a program to help start even at the high school level, better preparing students ready for the university so that they could be more inclusive and more folks would have an opportunity to attend university. They also had some very innovative first year programs designed to provide some scaffolding for those students that may have the aptitude but perhaps did not have the opportunity to attend a high school that had the high expectations needed by the university. They had some scaffolding to help with that. Another interesting thing that we learned was that collaboration is something that is a lot different in South Africa. Schools, universities do not tend to work well with each other. For example, if you took coursework and was going for a degree at the University of Cape Town, you would not be able to transfer to the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University with your credits. You'd almost essentially would have to start over. Now, there was some collaboration between universities abroad. They worked with many universities outside of South Africa, maybe not in a pure I'm transferring credits, but they had more collaborative efforts going on there. Another thing is that there seemed to be a slight disconnect between what was going on in the university and what was going on in the schools, the R12 schools. When we asked some administration, some of the higher education folks about what's going on in your schools, what situations are they facing, what kind of issues do they have, their answer was actually, I don't know. All we do is prepare the teachers. So there is a unique disconnect between the schools, whereas in the States, many of our universities are actually out working in the schools, sending people to know what's going on in the schools, having folks keep up with that. It didn't seem quite as important to some of the universities in South Africa. There also are some other unique differences in South African universities. One of the ones that I found fascinating is that they have a 3-year bachelor's program. What that really means is in the United States, we spend our first year with what I would call general education requirements. We might have Algebra 1, we might have English 1 in college algebra, college English. In South Africa, they assume that the general education requirements are taken care of at the high school level, and therefore they do not have to spend as much time with the general education requirements. Another thing I found fascinating is their doctoral programs. Basically, there's no coursework. For you to receive your doctorate, you do a dissertation. You do research in a dissertation, and that process is very similar, if not the same as the United States, but you do your dissertation, and if it's all is good, then you can receive your doctoral degree. So I did find that very fascinating. But all in all, the universities seemed like they were adjusting very well to the end of apartheid. They're still working diligently on working out with the inequities of the previous system, but their efforts certainly are beginning to pay off. In South Africa, we did have some time for sightseeing. Not a lot, because we were working really hard during the day and working hard on our studies at night, but we did get to see some amazing things in South Africa. Probably my favorite was Addo Elephant Park. Addo Elephant Park is a very large national park in South Africa, home to nearly 600 elephants, many zebras, many other animals. One of my favorites, if you look in the upper right here, is the warthog. I love the warthog. Zebras, we had the Cape buffalo. Of course, they even had lions. We did not see any lions that day, but there were lions, and I love the sign, Beware of Lions, as far as that goes. So Addo Elephant Park was certainly a wonderful experience to be able to see so many elephants and so many animals in their natural habitat, and was certainly a very unique experience. Another thing we were able to visit was actually the U.S. Embassy, and I do not have any photos of the U.S. Embassy because photos are not allowed. I did find this pictorial, this artist rendition of the U.S. Embassy online, but if you actually search for photos of the Cape Town U.S. Embassy, you won't find many. In fact, I don't think I found any, but I did find this artist's rendition. And I would say it's fairly accurate. But it was a very interesting trip to the U.S. Embassy. They gave us a briefing, and in that briefing they talked about some of the economic outlooks, some of the security, and even touched on some of the educational environments. And of course, they did talk about the HIV epidemic and how the United States is helping combat some of that. While in Cape Town, we had the opportunity to visit Robben Island. Robben Island was home to many political prisoners during the apartheid era. Before it was a prison, it was even a leper colony and an insane asylum. But Robben Island is best known for being the prison where Nelson Mandela spent 18 of his 27 years in prison. The photograph on the left is the actual cell where he spent most of his time. One of the very unique things about this trip to Robben Island was our tour guide at the actual prison. The gentleman in the upper right was our tour guide, and he had actually been a political prisoner at Robben Island, which really had more of an impact to what he was saying and describing his day-to-day conditions that he faced on Robben Island. The picture on the left-hand side is actually a picture of the lime quarry that the prisoners were required to work at during the day. This was also a quarry where Nelson Mandela worked, and later in life, President Mandela actually had vision problems that were attributed to his work in the mine because of course, the dust, but also because of the white, bright walls of the glaring sun, and it did cause some eye problems. If you look at the bottom right photo, you can see a very pretty photo, and that's actually looking out at Cape Town. So the island was very beautiful as well as being home to a prison. It also has a lot of wildlife. Here's a sea lion that you can see to your left. But overall, the trip to Robben Island was extremely thought-provoking and certainly a must for anyone who visits Cape Town and South Africa. The last topic is food. One of the first things I'm asked when I talk about South Africa was, what was the food like? Well, in reality, the food was actually great. A lot of great food. But nothing as different as folks could imagine. Because of the European influence and the Western influence, a lot of the food was very similar to what we have around here. Now, some of the ingredients were a little bit different. In this photo, you could see that I was eating ostrich steaks. And they were very good, and that was certainly different. One of the other interesting things is in South Africa, they are infatuated with biltong. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, that is a mobile biltong stand, Biltong King, where you could go buy biltong. Well, what is biltong? If you look at the left side here, that is biltong. It's basically beef jerky. Now, it's not quite your average beef jerky because basically there are lots and lots of different kinds and flavors of biltong. And if you go into a biltong store, there easily could be 50 or 60 different flavors and even different varieties of meat. I had beef biltong, I had springbok biltong, I had kudu biltong. So definitely biltong was a different treat. In the bottom right hand, you can see some of my more interesting food that I had. That was springbok, which was actually a raw springbok. I had a black mushroom and I had snails. So that was probably the most interesting food. Other than that, the food was very similar to the food that we have here. So I basically say when folks ask about the food, hey, the food was very good. And I had ostrich, kudu, and some biltong. Those are my odd things that I may have had. But the food was very good. My trip to South Africa certainly has changed my perspective on the world. There are many things that I have taken for granted that now I make sure that I don't. I'd like to leave you with this quote. Nelson Mandela. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. There was lots of evidence of this in South Africa. From the Love Life Center and their work educating people and helping save lives, to the improvements that all the schools we visit to have made since the end of apartheid, truly education is a very powerful tool.